I really don't like you, Evel. I never did. You're annoying with your dummy motorcycle doing your trick-or-treat jobs off walls. Who cares?
Hello and welcome to Vintage Pop. I'm your host, Greg May. This is our second episode of Vintage Pop. Hopefully you've already downloaded our first episode of Vintage Pop. If not, it is available on iTunes. You can download that and get caught up and get up to speed and enjoy the fun. I'm your host, Greg May, and if you don't know, Vintage Pop is a podcast hosted by me. This show is dedicated to bringing you the stuff you missed from yesterday from someone who was not there for it the first time around. And it should be, at least I hope so, a fun and informative look into pop culture of yesterday, and we'll be talking about movies, books, music, and TV, all will be talked about from all eras. So welcome to podcast number 2. A week ago, we recorded our first podcast, which was definitely a big burden for me to get over, and I feel like after the first podcast is now done, it was, like I said, it was kind of a very big hurdle to get over. For the longest time, for months, I wanted to start this podcast. For years, I've wanted to start a podcast to talk about things. For the longest time, I always thought it was going to be movies or just television. And I'm really enjoying the constraints of what vintage pop is and being able to kind of talk about whatever I'd like to talk about, depending on whether it's just movies that day or music or television or a book or anything like that. So, we'll get the contact information out of the way. If you'd like to email us, you can reach us at vintagepopcast@gmail.com. That's vintagepopcast@gmail.com. A bit of an update, we have a Twitter page now. It's at Vintage Popcast on Twitter, so you can check that out. I try to retweet a lot of old vintage ads. I try to tweet some things from TV, all kinds of different stuff. And also every now and then I try to give a hint of things that are to come on the podcast. If you haven't checked out our blog page, you should check it out. It's vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. That's vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. And we are happy to announce that I have an Amazon search bar on the podcast blog page. So I would ask that you add it to your bookmarks. And if you are doing some shopping on Amazon, please use our search bar on vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. I know it's a mouthful. Type it in once, add it to your bookmarks bar. When you're going shopping on Amazon, check out our blog page, use the search bar. I get some pennies out of it. I could maybe buy a chocolate bar or maybe a Tootsie Roll or a Jolly Rancher or something. I don't know. It's pennies on the dollar, but everything a little bit helps. So, a bit of an update since we have last spoken. I told you about the Twitter page. The blog page is live. And since we started on Libsyn, which is going to be our service provider for the RSS feed that you can access through iTunes, and I don't know if I mentioned or not, but we are on Podbean. I am waiting approval to get onto Stitcher as well. That way you can check us out on Stitcher, Podbean, and iTunes as well. Great thing about Libsyn is I'm able to upload to multiple different outlets, including the blog, the Twitter page, Facebook, as well as iTunes, Podbean, and Stitcher once that's going all at once. And I was really impressed when I saw all the downloads that were on Libsyn. Actually, since I uploaded the episode on the 12th, last Tuesday, we have had 35 downloads. And actually, as I'm recording this right now at 12:20 a.m. on Monday the 19th, we actually received a download within the last hour. So we were 34 downloads by the weekend, and we actually received one download today, and we are at 35. So thank you for everybody that has downloaded the show. If you have not already, please subscribe on iTunes. Leave us a review. Also, please rate it. I know that really helps us out, because if you do that, if we get enough of those, we come up on New and Noteworthy, and that'll really help the show and get the show out to listeners that may not exactly know the show. A lot of word of mouth has been going around about the show. My local bar that I go to, 1984, I'm really appreciating that some of the guys there are going to check out the podcast. Dan Richmond listened to the podcast. He really enjoys it. Another guy, Rich, at the bar, he said that he was going to check out the show, so I really appreciate the support. And like I said, we have listener mail at vintagepopcast@gmail.com. And I kind of was talking to Dan about it. And our show today is about Stuntmen, the Joey Chitwood thrill show. And ultimately, we'll be talking about Evel Knievel today and his inspirations from the Joey Chitwood thrill show, as well as the movie from 1977, Viva Knievel, which I actually watched tonight. And I usually was planning on recording on Mondays, but I guess it's technically Monday because it's 12:22 on a Monday. But I wanted to do it tonight because I watched Viva Knievel this evening with my dad, and I wanted to talk about it while it was fresh in my mind. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Joey Chitwood thrill show. There's been some new developments in collecting for the 16mm projector. There's an upcoming secret cinema event we'll talk about towards the end of the show, and plenty more to get through. Before we jump off to our quick break, though, I do want to read that email. I got a little sidetracked. Dan sent us an email about Evel Knievel. We were talking during the week, and he told me that he had a lot of different memories about Evel Knievel growing up in the 70s. He was talking in this email. He said that he definitely remembered watching the Snake River Canyon jump live on TV. We'll talk about that in a little while. And he also said everyone had the stunt cycle toy that you could wind up. And he left a link from YouTube that goes to the Lucky Penny shop. And we'll leave that in the show notes. I'll make a note for myself to show that in the show notes so that you can check it out and you can see how this stunt cycle toy worked. He had the lunchbox, and in 1977 his mom took him to the drive-in theater to see Viva Knievel, and he was saying how crazy the movie is, and it definitely is. He also leaves some show suggestions, and he said to check out Over the Edge from 1979. It's one of his favorite movies. I have not actually seen that yet, but it is now on the list, Dan, as potential show topics, so I will try and watch that soon so that we can talk about it. He said to do a show on Kiss, which would definitely be awesome. We could do the cartoon show, The Phantom in the Park, I think it's called. He also ideas for the show HBO, which that is a large thing that I want to talk about, and I'm not sure how I want to go about that yet. I don't know if I want to just do the history of HBO, or do I want to do the history of pay television at that time. I know a lot more about HBO, and I have a lot more material that I can watch and review about HBO, so we'll see how that goes. And he also says Saturday morning TV in the 70s, which would definitely be great to go to. And also, at some point, I have left down, I actually have Post-it note on the side of my computer about potential show ideas. One will be the NBC at 50 Years, which was a special that came out in 77 or 78. It was hosted by Orson Welles and had, Johnny Carson and Gene Kelly and Dean Martin and all kinds of different, I think Jerry Lewis too, all kinds of different celebrities at the time. Milton Berle's on there, and talking about the history of the network NBC. So that's definitely a show I want to get to. So thanks, Dan, for sending in the email. And like I said before, if any of the listeners out there want to send an email about comments, concerns, show suggestions, it's vintagepopcast@gmail.com. You can also tweet me or DM me at Twitter at vintagepopcast. So, quick rundown of the show. When we come back, we'll talk about Joey Chitwood and the Joey Chitwood thrill show. After that, we'll talk about Evel Knievel and Viva Knievel. And then before we go, I'd like to talk a little bit of an update on what's been going on with the 16mm projector trials and tribulations. There's a new update on that, as well as there's a secret cinema that's going to be coming this weekend that if you are in the Philadelphia area, you should check it out. More on that later, though. Right now, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we will jump right into Joey Chitwood here on Vintage Pop.
Show starts in 7 minutes.
This is Chris Shankle again. One last word. The place for automobile adventuring is in a thrill show, not on the highway. Remember, in your driving, wherever it may be, what a thrill driver must remember: know your car, know the road, know yourself. Don't take a chance.
All right, so welcome back to Vintage Pop. Again, I'm your host, Greg May, and the first thing I wanted to get into, actually, the whole reason of this show is because of a secret cinema event I went to about a couple weeks ago. I think it was the first week of February, called Jay Schwartz Presents Decade Cinema. Now, that was one of the names that was at the Bryn Mawr Film Institute. If you're local to the Philadelphia area, that's in Pennsylvania. And so it was going by either Jay Schwartz Presents Decade Cinema, but it also was going as the Secret Cinema. But all of it was an event of the Secret Cinema, which meets a couple times a month and screens things either on 16 millimeter most of the time, or in this case 35 millimeter. I left a note about it in the show notes for the previous show, and we'll leave a show note about it for this show. I mean, I'll probably be talking about it a lot throughout the course of the podcast, so I will leave a note about the Secret Cinema once again. They actually have an upcoming event about Oscar-winning shorts this coming weekend. I'll talk more about that towards the end of the show. But in this event, Jay Schwartz Presents Decade Cinema, there was a bunch of 35 millimeter shorts. I think I talked about it a little bit in the first show. One was about go-go dancing in discotheques in the 60s, but another was called Don't Take a Chance, and it was done in the late 60s, I want to say. It was a newsreel film, and you might have just heard a little bit about that as we came into this segment. I wanted to play a piece of it. I'm going to put the whole film, I found a clip of it on YouTube, and you can check it out. I'll leave that in the show notes, but I guess I should honestly just talk about what the hell the Joey Chitwood thrill show is. And what I learned about was from this film, Don't Take a Chance. And what it was a news report on stunt shows and thrill driving. And it all revolved around Joey Chitwood and his hell driver. So they show you all kinds of things of how they get prepared and how these people live, and they do all kinds of things, like a motorcycle driver. They light a whole board full of hay and wood on fire, and the motorcycle driver drives through it. And it was done at like big state fairs. And I think it was in the film, it was like the Minnesota or Michigan State Fair. I do not remember exactly. Like I said, you can check it out for yourself. But I was just really enthralled with all the old Chevys and jumping these ramps and doing T-bone car crashes and all this type of stuff. So I was really interested in all of it. So when I got home, one of the first things I did when I got home from this event, for all the films that we watched, I started trying to find them on YouTube, because I don't have a 35 millimeter projector. It would be obnoxious to have one. They cost like $4,000, but I'd love to have one. But what I did was I was able to locate the discotheque film and the Don't Take a Chance film on YouTube, which is great. I'll actually put both the discotheque and the discotheque one was called Danse a la Go-Go. I'll put that in the show notes, and I'll make sure to put Don't Take a Chance in the show notes. So after I watched this film, I started to get interested in Joey Chitwood, so I started reading about it, and I found out that Evel Knievel was inspired by Joey Chitwood to do all this stunt stuff that he did during his lifetime. So, of course, at that point, I was like, we definitely have to do a show on Evel Knievel. But I said, how could I do a show on Evel Knievel and not talk about what led me down this path in general? So we'll talk about Joey Chitwood. He was a race car driver, and he was born in 1912 as George Rice Chitwood. He was from Denison, Texas, and he had Indian ancestry and was dubbed Joey by a track promoter, and that's how he got the nickname Joey. So from my research, he started as a race car driver from 1934 to 1950. He never won the Indianapolis 500, but he finished 5th place on 3 separate occasions after 7 times, and in 1950 he was actually the first man to ever wear a safety belt. Now, what I thought was really interesting is that Joey was frequently used as a stuntman in Hollywood films, and he had all kinds of minor roles, one in particular with Clark Gable and Barbara Stanwyck in the 1950 film To Please a Lady. But his son also was a stunt driver, and he is credited as the stunt coordinator for the 1973 Bond film Live and Let Die. And if you've seen that movie, you know there's all kinds of different car chases, a big one in the middle of the film. I remember James Bond actually jumps the river on a speedboat, and it was really, really cool. So in that film, Don't Take a Chance, like I was talking about, I was able to see Joey Chitwood and his hell drivers, and they did all kinds of stunts, from driving on 2 wheels to driving cars through. They drive a car through what I could only tell you was a cannon. You have to see it to believe it. You really got to check out this video in the show notes. And during the course of the stunt show, as many as 110,000 people packed Soldier Field in Chicago for a single presentation back in the 50s. And they estimated, from what I read, that 25 million to 30 million people saw the show during its 55-year run, which ended in 1998, which was taken up by his son. His son actually took over the thrill show up until its ending, and back in 1978, he set a world record when he drove a Chevy Chevette for 5.6 miles on two wheels. And actually, a fun fact for you, if you were a fan of the show Chips in the 70s, you may have seen the show that was featured in an episode called Thrill Show. So the Joey Chitwood Thrill Show was actually in an episode of Chips. I actually have 2 seasons of Chips on DVD. I actually want to talk about that show at some point. So we'll have to check that out on DVD and see if I have that episode, and I'll get back to you about that. But before we talked about Evel Knievel, I definitely wanted to get some of the back information out of the way and talk a little bit about what inspired the man that we're going to talk about today, Evel Knievel. So we'll take another break. When we come back, we'll talk about Evel Knievel, the man himself, and we will get into talking about our film for today, 1977's Viva Knievel, right here on Vintage Pop.
NBC 77, the year of the big events, the super specials. And the events will be even bigger in 78.
Hey, some nights are gonna be special. Some nights are gonna be rare. Night after night of excitement. It's gonna be filling the air. It's gonna be a big year. 78 on NBC. A big year.
Never waste a card.
That's right. Never waste. Don't just use up a card if you're not going to do it. All right. Have you met? Have you met? It's not Evil. Evil. It's Evel. I suppose he pronounces it Evel. Does he not?
I think he says evil.
Oh.
We'll find out when he comes out.
Get a motion picture part and you start correcting people.
He'll find out. The man will be out here any moment.
Well, I'm going to check with him when he comes out
Let
anyway.
him cycle out and we'll ask him.
That's right. He's probably the only man in history who's become very wealthy by trying to kill himself. It's true. He is somewhat of a legend. He does incredible stunts with motorcycles, and he has broken, I guess, more bones than anybody in history. And yet he keeps at this. And he's planning to jump over 50 cars this Sunday at the Los Angeles Coliseum, and it's called an Evel Knievel Spectacular. So let us meet the gentleman. Here is Evel Knievel.
Welcome back to Vintage Pop. So we'll get right back into it, and now what I wanted to do, we'll keep this all in one segment. We'll talk about Evel Knievel himself, and we'll talk about the film Viva Knievel. So we'll start by talking about Evel Knievel. He was born Robert Craig Knievel Jr. He was born October 17th, 1938, professionally known as Evel Knievel. He was an American stunt performer, painter, according to Wikipedia, entertainer, and international icon. Now, I'm definitely going to have to look up now if they ever sold any type of Evel Knievel like paintings. I mean, like you know how you can get like a Braque or a Rembrandt or a Picasso. Could you get an Evel Knievel print? I think it's a little early for me trying to do humor, but I mean, I think it's funny. So over the course of his career, he attempted more than 75 ramp to motorcycle jumps. In 1974, he failed an attempted canyon jump across Snake River Canyon in the Sky Cycle X2, a steam-powered rocket, which, if you remember from the beginning of the show, Dan actually saw that live on television. So, some early life. He was born in 1938 in Montana. He was the first of 2 children, Robert E. and Anne Marie Keogh Knievel. Growing up, he participated in local professional rodeos and ski jumping events, including winning the Northern Rocky Mountain Ski Association Class A Men's Ski Jumping Championship in 1959. Can you imagine saying to someone in a bar, like you walk up to a girl and you sit next to her, and you're telling her a little bit about yourself, and you just go like, hey, do you know that I'm the Northern Rocky Mountain Ski Association Class A Men's Ski Jumping Champion of 1959? Well, I guess she'd be impressed if she didn't walk away while you were telling the story yet. So anyway, in the late 50s, Knievel joined the United States Army. He was able to join the track team, and he did tons of other stuff. But you're probably wondering, how did Evel Knievel become Evel Knievel? Well, while trying to support his family, he recalled the Joie Chitwood show he saw as a boy, as we were talking about in the previous segment, and he decided that he could do something similar by riding a motorcycle. So he promotes the show himself, he rents the venue, writes all the press releases, sets up the show, sells tickets. And his first jump, he proceeded to jump a 20-foot-long box of rattlesnakes and 2 mountain lions. And apparently, despite landing short and having his back wheel hit the box containing the rattlesnakes, he managed to land safely. I would not have jumped any of that crap. Honestly, I would probably be more afraid of the rattlesnakes than the mountain lions, though, to be honest with you. By 1966, he started calling himself Evel Knievel, and him and his Daredevils debuted on January 3rd, 1966. At the National Date Festival in Indio, California. It was a huge success. He received several offers to host the show after their first performance. And going down, their second booking was then in Hemet, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, California, but it was canceled due to rain. After that, they performed at Barstow, California on February 10th. And he attempted a new stunt in which he would jump spread-eagled over a speeding motorcycle. He jumped too late, and the motorcycle hit him in the groin, and it tossed him 15 feet in the air. He was in the hospital because of the injuries, but when he was released, of course, he finished the performance. So the first big one that everybody remembers is in 1967 when he was at Caesar's Palace and he wanted to jump the fountains. So he didn't have anything really going for him yet other than these daredevils. So to get an audience with the casino's CEO, Jay Sarno, he apparently created a fictitious corporation. It was called the Evel Knievel Enterprises. And he made 3 fictitious lawyers up to make phone calls to him. And he also placed phone calls to Sarno claiming to be from the American broadcast company, ABC, and Sports Illustrated, inquiring about the jumps. So Sarno finally agrees to meet Knievel, and they arranged to jump the fountains on December 31st, 1967, New Year's Eve. So after the deal set, he tried to get ABC to air the event on the Wide World of Sports, but they declined it. But they said that they would air it if he completed the jump. So he was 29 at the time, and many of you might know how this goes, but if you don't, he actually tumbled off the handlebars after he completed the jump, and he skidded into the Dunes parking lot. Because of that, he suffered a crushed pelvis, a femur, fracture to his hip, wrist, and both ankles, and a concussion that kept him in the hospital. There was a rumor that he was in a coma for 29 days, but his wife refuted it. But, of course, the Caesar's Palace crash was Knievel's longest attempted motorcycle jump at 141 feet, and after the crash and recovery, he was more famous than ever because ABC bought the rights to film the jump, paying far more than they would have because he crashed, and that's real nice, right? So a couple of cool things. In 68, this is actually not cool at all. He crashed while attempting to jump 15 Ford Mustangs. He ended up breaking his right leg and foot as a result of the crash. In 68, he returned to jumping, and he was earning $25,000 per performance, and he was making all kinds of jumps until October 13th in Carson City, Nevada. He fell while trying to stick the landing on his brake, and he broke his hip again. You're going to follow a trend here. So a few successes and failures, keep going and going and going, and finally we get to the big one that everybody's that has always talked about. Now, I always thought that he jumped the Grand Canyon, or he failed jumping the Grand Canyon. So apparently what it was is he actually jumped the Snake River Canyon, which was in southern Idaho. Believe it or not, some of the people that actually promoted this jump, one of them was Vince McMahon of WWE. So that's kind of cool. So anyway, to the jump. He hired an engineer, Doug Malowicki, to build him a rocket-powered cycle to jump across the Snake River. He called it the Sky Cycle X1. And it was a steam engine built by former Aerojet engineer Robert Trow. But that one didn't work, so they had to build another one, and eventually it was the Sky Cycle X2. And instead of a motorcycle, it would take off more like a rocket. So to the launch itself, the launch took place at the south rim of the Snake River Canyon, west of Shoshone Falls, on Sunday, September 8th, 1974, at 3:36. The steam that powered the engine was superheated to the temperature of 500 degrees. And what happened was, because of this, it made the parachute prematurely deploy as the Sky Cycle left the launching rail and induced significant drag. And he wound up landing in the middle of the canyon. He survived the jump with only minor injuries, but he did not jump the canyon. So all kinds of stuff happened after that. In 75, he did a jump at Wembley Stadium. Also in 1975, he jumped 14 Greyhound buses at Kings Island in Cincinnati, Ohio. And in 1977, He was scheduled for a major jump in Chicago, and it was inspired of the film Jaws. He was going to jump a tank full of live sharks, and it would be televised live nationally. However, he lost control of the motorcycle during the rehearsal and crashed into a cameraman. He broke both of his arms, and he was actually so upset about the footage that he did not show it for 19 years until the documentary Absolute Evil, the Evel Knievel story came out. So one of Evel Knievel's biggest core values was the anti-drug message, and that he would always preach his anti-drug message to children and adults before all of his stunts. He had all kinds of toys and stuff, and you really don't understand the big magnitude of how popular Evel Knievel was back in the 70s. My dad and I were talking about it as we were watching Viva Knievel tonight, and he was just talking about how big he was and how people used to set up jumps with their bicycles and do it out in the neighborhood and how crazy it was. So unfortunately, Evel Knievel passed away in Clearwater, Florida on November 30th of 2007 at the age of 69. He'd been suffering from diabetes and pulmonary fibrosis for many years, and that he apparently had very big trouble breathing for towards the end of his years. But he was definitely an icon and an amazing stuntman and inspired many people and was such a big thing. I really wish that I could have experienced some of the jumps when they were televised on television. Maybe not so much the one that they crashed. I'm not the type of person that roots to see if somebody crashes, but it definitely would have been crazy to see some of the stuff that he did. So I was thinking we were going to do it all in one big segment, but the more I think about it, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about the film Viva Knievel, and we'll just keep moving right along right here on Vintage Pop.
Hi, I'm Barry Tompkins. As the second season picks up steam, Tim McCarver and I will be on hand to cover the bases and keep you posted on what's sure to be one of the most heated pennant scrambles ever. Can the division champions repeat their first season victories, or will this be the season of the underdog? Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure, baseball fans are in for an unpredictable outcome. And we'll be here with updates, interviews, and in-depth analysis on Race for the Pennant tomorrow on HBO.
Non-stop weekends begin in September on HBO.
Evel Knievel. He puts his life on the line with every death-defying jump. The indestructible Evel in the excitement picture of the year, Viva Knievel.
Hey, welcome back to Vintage Pop. So I thought that I was kind of rambling on and on and on about Evel Knievel. So I wanted to kind of take a breather before we got into the next part of the show, which is the biggest part of the show. We'll be talking about the 1977 film Viva Knievel. And you know, it's funny, I did not even think about talking about this movie. I was just going to talk about Joey Chitwood and the thrill show and how he inspired Evel Knievel, and I was just talk about Evel Knievel's life, and then just kind of give you an update of what's been going on as far as collections and stuff like that. But then Dan mentioned to me during the week about this film and how he saw it in the drive-in, so I was like, well, I gotta watch it. So I rented it tonight off of Amazon.com on their instant video services, which was cool. It's only $2.99 if you want to check it out. I'll leave a link to the rental in the show notes. It's really not anywhere. It's not on YouTube. I tried to stream it on other services. Netflix doesn't have it. Hulu doesn't have it. But I did find it on Amazon Instant Video. It was a $2.99 rental. Well worth it. We'll get right into it. So, Viva Knievel was released in 1977. Starred Evel Knievel, who played himself, Lauren Hutton, who you might know from American Gigolo, and Gene Kelly, who was in wonderful musicals for years. And I thought this was definitely an odd placement for him. Film was directed by Gordon Douglas. It starts with a very catchy theme song, and and you may have heard a little bit of it before we started this segment. Music was done by Charles Bernstein, who actually had some pretty good credits. He did the music to Mr. Majestic, White Lightning, Gator, this film Viva Knievel, The Entity in '82, Cujo in '83. He did the music to Nightmare on Elm Street, April's Fool's Day, and he actually did an episode of Nova in 2009. As far as the director credits go, Gordon Douglas. This was actually his last film. Some of the things that you may know, he did Up Periscope, Stagecoach in 66, Young at Heart in 54. Tons of shorts between 1936 and 38. Some of them actually look like some Our Gang shorts, Little Rascals. So a pretty decent filmography. Well, we'll get right into it. And the movie starts, you see Evel Knievel. He drops by an orphanage of all places to drop off some toys. Hopefully there were some of those wind-up toys that are in that Lucky Penny Shop video that Dan sent us. But, I mean, keep going back to this. It's hard to understand the magnitude if you weren't there for it. And it's hard for me to understand of how popular he was in the 70s and how kids used to set up ramps and drive over them with their bikes back in the day. So at this orphanage, after the orphanage, he shows up at this stadium in Long Beach to much fanfare. And that's when you first see Gene Kelly, who is Evel's manager or like mechanic. His name's Will. And you even get to see Red Buttons for a minute, the comedian. He did tons of specials back in the day. You might see him from like the Dean Martin roast. I know there's a special on HBO that I have sitting from 1980. So anyway, Evel Knievel, he's getting interviewed for this upcoming jump, and out of nowhere, Lauren Hutton emerges from a helicopter. The helicopter flies into the stadium. I don't know why. I don't know why she gets a helicopter and Evel Knievel doesn't get the helicopter entrance, but she gets out and perches herself up on a car to take pictures of Evel Knievel. And her name's Kate Morgan in this film, if you were keeping notes. But I'm probably going to refer to her as Lauren Hutton throughout the whole thing. She's definitely a real winner in this, and I mean that in the most sarcastic way possible. She's there to cover a story only if he hurts himself or dies. So she's a real nice person. Evel is also not the best actor on earth. I could definitely say that. Most of the lines are delivered very stale and pretty dry. There's one point where Red Buttons is not going to pay him for the jump, and he very dryly just says, "No pay, no evil." I know he could do it much better than I, so you got to see the movie because I can't do an Evel Knievel impersonation. But how about this? Right after that, Leslie Nielsen makes an appearance, and he and his associates look like they're planning to like sabotage Evel Knievel. So we quickly find out that Gene Kelly is a booze hound and like a burnout alcoholic mechanic that was like once a stuntman, but like I don't know, he's just not doing it anymore. So this guy Jesse shows up, who was like with Leslie Nielsen and company, and he shows up, and after like a brief conversation with Gene Kelly, he drugs his bottle, and then he starts taking pictures of the trailer all over the place while Gene Kelly's like all dazed out because he got roofied or something. So the next day, Lauren Hutton shows up, and at this point, Evel's like kind of freaking out at Gene Kelly because he thinks he's just being like a burnout again. But Lauren Hutton shows up, and Evel takes her for a ride, and you get a nice 70s score to go along with it. But clearly, she's obviously not impressed with it because she has no soul in this movie. And then out of nowhere, here's a good plot, subplot for you. Will's son, Tommy, randomly shows up. He's at the track now, and he's greeted by Gene Kelly by, "What the hell are you doing here?" He's never met his son, and he's kind of a jerk to him, and that keeps going on through the movie. And Tommy keeps newspaper clippings, and it turns out that, yes, Will, Gene Kelly's character, was a stuntman himself one time. So Evel comes and gives the kid a much warmer reception than his deadbeat dad, Gene Kelly, does. And this is like really uncommon for me to see Gene Kelly play this role. I'm used to like this happy-go-lucky singing in the rain type of role. But anyway, Jesse gets out of the limo, the guy that drugged Gene Kelly, and offers a promotion to jump in Mexico, which he turns down. And finally, at this point, we are at the 31-minute mark of the movie, and we get the jump. Frank Gifford, who you may know had an affair with one of Johnny Carson's wives, which is very unfortunate. He stops by to announce, and the stadium is showing off all the different vehicles that Evel Knievel has used over like his past jumps, which was kind of neat to see. They had like the rocket from the Grand Canyon jump. So Lauren Hutton stops by, and she gives Evel Knievel another put down before he jumps. But they're a good thing because Tommy was there and kind of makes him feel a little better and hands him his helmet. Oh, and also Leslie Nielsen gets box seats to this event, so that was very good for him. Oh, and also before the jump, he gives a trademark speech on the war of drugs. Nancy Reagan would be very impressed. And after a quick inspection of the ramp, and there's some lions and tigers below the jump, it's time for the main event. Well, he does the jump, but he doesn't stick the landing, most like some of the jumps that he's done in real life. Leslie Nielsen from his box seat says that he could get him the best doctor, and at that point, Evel announces his retirement, as he makes his exit on both of his feet with help from Jesse and Gene Kelly. So at the hospital, Jesse is racing around Evel Knievel in his wheelchair, and Evel Knievel actually brought his own personalized robe to the hospital. Jesse tries to convince him to come out of retirement. Lauren Hutton stops by at the hospital to see if he's died yet and also to apologize, and he tells her that he's going to go to Mexico. He accepts Jesse's offer and he invites her to come along. I don't know why. Off they go to Mexico. So at a welcome party, once they get to Mexico, he's with Gene Kelly, and there's getting all kinds of photos taken of the two of them. And all the flashes start to like space Gene Kelly out, and he starts to have a flashback and kind of realizes that what Jesse was doing when he drugged him that night. So that they go to the next day. And it's turning out that like Evel Knievel is becoming more of a father to Tommy than Gene Kelly is, and gets him a bike. He falls off. Gene Kelly flips out, and then Evel Knievel gives Gene Kelly a lesson in parenting. But it turns out that Gene Kelly's character, Will, blames Tommy for his wife's death because she died at childbirth. So that kind of explains why Gene Kelly's been a jerk to the kid the whole movie. So flashback to Leslie Nielsen and his cronies, and you find out the full plan. And they plan on using a fake trailer that looks like Evel Knievel's to smuggle drugs out of Mexico, but they want to try and kill him off first. So Gene Kelly starts snooping around after he had like his space out from camera flashes, and he finds photographs that were taken, and he kind of gets savvy to what's going on. But that guy Jesse and Leslie Nielsen drug him, and he gets locked up in a sanitarium run by Dabney Coleman. You might know Dabney Coleman from War Games and 9 to 5. And as the podcast I listen to, 80s All Over, says, Dabney Coleman is first rate. So more sabotage starts getting planned by Leslie Nielsen. And later on at this point, Evel dresses up as a doctor to try and bust Gene Kelly out. And here's what I thought might have been funny. You know, they released all these Evel Knievel toys. What if they ever released an Evel Knievel action figure with sanitarium scrubs? I'd buy it. You should probably check eBay. Please, if you find one, ship it to me. So Gene Kelly brings Evel Knievel up to speed on what's going on. So Evel decides that he has to leave Gene Kelly at the mental institution so that Leslie Nielsen does not get wise to know like that they know what's going on now. So we finally get to like the big jump of the movie that he was like set up to do, and it's a 100 feet of flaming death, as Frank Gifford puts it, as he is still the announcer in Mexico, and Evel Knievel prepares to jump this flaming pit of death. Before that, of course, Leslie Nielsen has box seats to the event, and Jesse overhears him talking bad about him and that he's a junkie, and he makes his way to the ramp to tell Evel the plan. And then Jesse knocks him out and takes his place. But the bike, believe it or not, is actually sabotaged by Leslie Nielsen. So Jesse dies on the bike. So after Evel Knievel comes to, he springs into action and he gets on his Stratocycle, which is like, it's got a bald eagle face on it, and it's got wings, and it's pretty cool, actually. And he busts out Gene Kelly out of Dabney Coleman's mental institution. Meanwhile, Leslie Nielsen is taking Lauren Hutton and Tommy hostage, and they are getting the fake trailer ready. So I don't want to give the ending away, but you can probably tell where this is going to go. But it's definitely a fun film. I'll tell you what Variety said. According to Variety, in the most daring feat of his career, Evel Knievel leaps over a mountain of blazing cliches and a cavernous plot, somehow landing upright to the predictable cheers of his legions of fans. Actually, Evel the actor emerges from the wreck in better shape than the bent careers of his veteran co-stars. Ow. Gene Kelly, Marjo Gortner, Red Buttons, Lauren Hutton, and Leslie Nielsen. For him, it's a chance to show he can be fairly natural in front of the camera when the demands are minimal. For them, it's a credit best forgotten. I thought it was an okay movie. It's worth $2.99. Definitely worth $2.99. If you have not seen it, please rent it. Like I said, I'll put the link to it on the link for the Amazon rental on the show notes. But it's definitely got some really laugh out loud moments. Definitely Evel Knievel's speech on drugs is hilarious, as well as most of the lines of no pay, no evil. Him interacting with Gene Kelly being a raging alcoholic is hilarious. So I'm really glad that Dan brought this movie up to me to watch, and it was definitely worth it and a great addition to talking about Evel Knievel. So we'll take one final break, and when we come back, I'll tell you what's been going on. I'll tell you about an upcoming event in the Philadelphia area. And I teased you last time about what we're going to do for the next show, but I'm not exactly sure yet. So we'll keep that open. It's to be determined. But we'll take that quick break. We'll come right back. Vintage Pop.
A winter storm in summer. A cold front in a cup at 7-Eleven. Below freezing predicted. Slurpee takes the simmer out of summer. Curious, bold, rare, sensational. It'll freeze your pipes. And now at 7-Eleven, you can get a Slurpee in a surprise cup. 24 ounces of your favorite Slurpee flavor. And there's a surprise on the bottom of the cup. You get a different surprise with every Slurpee surprise cup at 7-Eleven.
All right, so welcome back to Vintage Pop. I hope you guys really enjoyed some of the stuff about the Joey Chitwood thrill show, what we talked about Evel Knievel, as well as Viva Knievel, which you definitely got to check out. I told you the rental will be in the show notes, so definitely check it out. So I want to take this time to kind of give you an update of what's going on with me and my collections. The biggest thing for me since I started going to the Secret Cinema showings actually was to get my 16mm projectors going. So I have two 16mm projectors I got in high school. So that was about like 8 years ago. They're both Ikeys. One's a bigger one, one's a slimline model. So the slimline model, well, first off, I'll talk about the big one. They both have this same problem. Apparently, when the film goes through it, if it's got a really bad splice or like a scotch tape splice or the sprocket holes are out of whack at all, it starts like chattering really loud as it starts going through the film projector. So that's not good for anybody. The big one also has like a sound problem. It gets like very garbled. It's not good. So I've had these two projectors. I just picked up a film I think I was talking about in the last podcast. It's a Disney Western from 1969, Hang Your Hat on the Wind. I was able to watch that completely with my family without, maybe just had to adjust it a couple times, but it was definitely doing that chattering. So I've been looking for more and more films and comedy shorts, which before I forget, I want to mention one book that from the first Secret Cinema event I went to in January. And I'll leave this in the show notes if you're interested. If you like the Three Stooges, if you like Laurel and Hardy, if you've ever heard of Leon Errol, Tom Kennedy, Billy Gilbert, Our Gang, Little Rascal shorts, you're going to want to check this book out. And it's called The Great Movie Shorts, Those Wonderful 1- and 2-Reelers of the 30s and 40s. It's by Leonard Maltin. He wrote the book when he was about 20. It was published February 1st, 1972. I'll leave a note where you can get it on Amazon. I picked mine up for about $5. So anyway, this is why I want to get into the 16mm collection. I want to see some of these shorts myself. I want to be able to screen them from friends, people that can't go to the Secret Cinema events. So I've been looking to buy films, and a couple weeks ago, this is before the Super Bowl even, I found a post on Craigslist that a guy was selling 16mm educational films for $1 each. So I just needed crap to test on the projector. So I was like, I could definitely get a few of these. So me and this guy have been going back and forth through email, this guy Chris, for about 4 weeks. Well, this past Friday, which was the 16th, we finally were coordinating a time and I was able to swing by after work. It turns out this guy is a massive 16mm collector. He told me 3,000 films in the basement. There was projectors all in a workshop. He had these stacks of educational films, tons and tons and tons of them. He said I could take whatever I want, and he actually allowed me to have them for free. I was willing to offer money for him, but he's a really nice guy. He sent me a manual later that evening about my projector and what we think it is. It's a part on the bottom called a loop setter, automatic loop setter, which is supposed to knock the film out of whack when it's doing that. Of course, when I tried to work on it, I think I made it worse. I stripped the head on a screw so now I can't open the projector up. But he's going to help me. I might be able to drop it off at him, but we're making strides in the right direction. So I definitely want to start looking at films to show in the spring, getting a screen together and stuff like that. So that should be really cool. And before I go, I wanted to talk about some upcoming events. Well, upcoming event. And the biggest one is what I'm going to, the Secret Cinema on Saturday, this coming Saturday, February 24th. The Secret Cinema will salute the upcoming Academy Award ceremony with a special program at the Fleischer Art Memorial in South Philadelphia. And the event is called And the Envelope Please, Oscar-winning short films 1932 to 1968. It will feature shorts familiar to film buffs as well as several that have been completely forgotten. According to the Secret Cinema, they feel that they deserve to be seen again, and they include live-action short dramas and comedies, documentaries and cartoons from America and abroad, There will be one complete show at 8 p.m. this coming Saturday. Admission is $9, and if you're local to the area, the screening will be shown in the beautiful sanctuary of the Fleischer Art Memorial in Philadelphia's Bella Vista neighborhood. It's just south of Center City. Free parking is available in the Fleischer's parking lot just across the street, and as usual with these events, it will be projected in 16mm film on a giant screen. So I'm actually really excited to see it. Some of the highlights are the Music Box from 1932, a Laurel and Hardy short. Glass from 1959, which is about glass making. That should be interesting. The Golden Fish from 59 was a Jacques Cousteau film, and Saul Bass with his 1968 film Why Man Creates, plus The Critic from 1963, Happy Anniversary from 62, and more. I will leave a link to the Secret Cinemas website. If you are on Facebook, you can find them on the Secret Cinemas page on Facebook. I'd love to see you there. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. We talked about it a little bit in the beginning of the show with Dan's email. I have a list of show ideas, one being the 70s cop TV show Chips, the history of pay TV, the $6 Million Man. We got On the Over the Edge from 79, which Stan was talking about. Maybe Downhill Skier, the Optigan Spotlight, which Optigan was a organ, electronic organ, which I wanted to talk about. It probably won't take a whole show. The best of 1970s adverts, the film Rolling Thunder, NBC at 50 years, and for fun, how about a toast to Richard Burton? So I'm not sure what we'll do yet, but definitely the way the release schedule looks like, I'm going to try and record them Sunday nights, Monday mornings, edit them between Monday night, and the episodes should be available on iTunes by late Monday night, early Tuesday morning. The plan is to have them ready so that you can download them every Tuesday morning. So definitely getting the ball rolling here, and I'm happy to finish episode 2. I hope you enjoyed the show this week. If you have any comments, concerns, questions, vintagepopcast@gmail.com is the email. That's vintagepopcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at vintagepopcast. That's again Vintage Popcast on Twitter. We've got the blog page, vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. That's vintagepop-podcast.blogspot.com. And please do your shopping with our Amazon search bar so I can buy some candy while I'm recording the show. Also, we are on Podbean, and I am looking forward to hopefully be on Stitcher. So lots of things to talk about. Please email me with more show ideas. Maybe you could supersede one of mine. You never know. But thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Vintage Pop. Have a great week.